"Thompson, you need to understand something," said Colonel Bradley Morrison, leaning back in his pristine office chair with the casual arrogance of someone who had never spent a day in the field. "Your deployment is ending next month, and frankly, the program has been running fine without your unique approach. Major Davis will be taking over permanent oversight of the logistics coordination system. You're replaceable." The words hung in the air of his air-conditioned office at Bagram Airfield like the dust from a distant explosion. I sat across from him in my combat fatigues, still carrying the grit and sweat from this morning's convoy operation, listening to a man who spent his deployment managing PowerPoint presentations tell me that my 3 years building the most efficient supply chain operation in Theta were easily duplicated. "I understand, sir," I replied, maintaining the measured tone that had kept me alive through 4 deployments and countless bureaucratic ambushes. "I'll ensure a smooth transition to Major Davis." What I didn't mention was that Major Davis had never even visited the forward operating bases where the real logistics challenges existed, had no understanding of the tribal dynamics that affected our supply routes, and had absolutely no knowledge of the intricate network of relationships, protocols, and workarounds I had spent 3 years developing across 8 provinces. As I left Morrison's office, I checked my secure phone and saw the message I'd been expecting. Quarterly audit scheduled for next month. Full operational review of all logistics protocols and cost efficiency measures. Defense Logistics Agency. The timing was perfect. Morrison had just declared me replaceable 1 month before an independent audit would reveal exactly what I had built during my time in Afghanistan. While he saw me as just another logistics officer shuffling supplies from point A to point B, the audit would quantify something he couldn't comprehend. I had revolutionized how the entire Theta managed resources, cut operational costs by $47 million annually, and created sustainable systems that had kept soldiers alive while maximizing mission effectiveness. I walked back to my quarters with a calm certainty. They would discover just how replaceable I really was. My name is Major William Thompson, 36 years old, with 14 years of active duty service in the U.S. Army. My military occupational specialty is 92 Automated Logistical Specialist. But that clinical designation hardly captures the reality of what I do. I design, implement, and manage supply chain operations in combat environments where failure means soldiers don't eat, don't get ammunition, and don't come home alive. My expertise lies in understanding not just the technical aspects of logistics, but the human, cultural, and environmental factors that make or break operational effectiveness in complex theaters like Afghanistan. I grew up in rural Montana, where my father ran a small freight company serving remote ranches and mining operations across 3 counties. From age 12, I spent summers learning how to move essential supplies across difficult terrain, navigate relationships with independent-minded clients, and solve problems with limited resources and infinite variables. That early education in practical logistics, combined with my military training and multiple combat deployments, had prepared me for the challenges of keeping a modern army supplied in one of the world's most difficult operating environments. My first deployment to Afghanistan in 2019 was as a captain assigned to a forward support company in Helmand Province. The logistics system I inherited was functional but inefficient, relying on standardized procedures that didn't account for local realities, tribal dynamics, or the creative solutions required when enemy action disrupted primary supply routes. Within 6 months, I had redesigned our distribution network, established relationships with local contractors who could provide backup capabilities, and implemented tracking systems that reduced supply shortages by 73% while cutting transportation costs by 28%. That success led to my current assignment as the Senior Logistics Coordinator for Regional Command East, responsible for supply chain operations across 8 provinces and 47 bases. The scope was enormous, managing everything from ammunition and fuel to food, medical supplies, and construction materials for over 12,000 personnel operating in some of the most challenging terrain and security environments in Theta. When I arrived 3 years ago, the logistics operation was struggling with systemic problems, excessive waste, frequent shortages of critical supplies, dangerous over-reliance on a few major supply routes, and astronomical costs that were drawing scrutiny from Washington. Previous commanders had tried to address these issues through traditional military approaches, more regulations, stricter procedures, additional oversight, but the problems persisted because they fundamentally misunderstood the operational Environment. I took a different approach, one informed by my Montana background and refined through previous deployments. Instead of imposing rigid systems, I spent my first 6 months studying the actual patterns of supply and demand across the region, mapping the informal networks that kept operations running, and identifying the key relationships and cultural factors that determine success or failure. What I discovered was that effective logistics in Afghanistan required thinking beyond traditional military doctrine. Success depended on understanding tribal dynamics that affected transportation routes, seasonal patterns that impacted local contractor availability, and the complex web of relationships between coalition forces, Afghan government entities, and local business networks. Over the following 30 months, I systematically rebuilt our logistics operation from the ground up. I established direct relationships with tribal elders who controlled key transportation corridors, negotiated innovative contracts with local suppliers that provided backup capabilities during kinetic operations, and created flexible distribution networks that could adapt to changing security conditions without losing effectiveness. Most importantly, I developed what I called the Adaptive Resource Management System, a comprehensive approach that combined real-time demand forecasting, cultural intelligence, and distributed decision-making to optimize resource allocation across the region. The system wasn't just about moving supplies, it was about understanding and anticipating the human factors that determined operational success. The results were dramatic. Over 3 years, I reduced supply-related mission delays by 89%, cut logistics costs by $47 million annually, and most importantly, eliminated supply shortages that had previously endangered mission effectiveness and soldier safety. The system I built was resilient enough to maintain operations during major enemy offensives, flexible enough to support unexpected mission requirements, and efficient enough to earn recognition from the Defense Logistics Agency as a model for other theaters. However, these achievements were largely invisible to senior commanders like Colonel Morris, who measured success through traditional metrics rather than understanding the complex systems that delivered results. To them, logistics was a support function that should operate smoothly in the background without requiring specialized expertise or innovative thinking. This disconnect became apparent when Morrison arrived 6 months ago as the new regional commander. A career infantry officer with limited logistics experience, he immediately began streamlining operations according to textbook approaches that worked well in garrison, but ignored the realities of operating in Afghanistan. He questioned my unconventional methods, criticized my relationships with local contractors as unnecessarily complicated, and repeatedly suggested that logistics should be simplified through standard procedures. The tension reached a breaking point 3 weeks ago during a briefing where I explained why we couldn't simply eliminate certain local contractors who Morrison viewed as expensive and unnecessary. These weren't just suppliers. They were essential links in a network that provided backup capabilities, local intelligence, and cultural access that kept our supply lines functioning during security emergencies. This is overcomplicated, Morrison declared. We need standard procedures that any logistics officer can implement. What happens if you get killed tomorrow? How does someone else run this system of yours? I attempted to explain that the system was thoroughly documented and that several junior officers had been trained in its operation, but Morrison had already made up his mind. In his view, effective military operations required simplicity and standardization, not the complex adaptive approach I had developed. The announcement that Major Davis would be taking over confirmed Morrison's fundamental misunderstanding of what I had built. Davis was a competent officer with strong academic credentials but no experience with the cultural and operational complexities of Afghan logistics. More importantly, he shared Morrison's preference for textbook solutions over adaptive approaches that accounted for local realities. As I prepared for my transition meeting with Davis, I received notification that the quarterly Defense Logistics Agency audit had been scheduled for the month following my departure. This timing was fortunate because the audit would provide an independent assessment of our logistics operations, including the systems and relationships I had developed over 3 years. The DLA audit was comprehensive, conducted by a team of logistics specialists and financial analysts who examined every aspect of our operations: cost effectiveness, mission support capabilities, risk management, and operational sustainability. Unlike the PowerPoint-based assessments that informed Morrison's opinions, this audit involved detailed field evaluations, contractor interviews, and comprehensive data analysis. I cooperated fully with the audit team, providing documentation of our procedures, introducing them to key personnel and contractors, and explaining the rationale behind various aspects of our operation. I also prepared comprehensive transition materials for Davis, though I suspected he would implement significant changes regardless of documented effectiveness. My departure from Afghanistan was routine, no ceremony, no recognition, just another rotation in the endless cycle of military personnel movements. Morris wished me luck in my next assignment with the kind of perfunctory courtesy reserved for officers who have served adequately, but not exceptionally. Davis seemed eager to begin implementing his own approaches to logistics management. 3 weeks after my return to Fort Bragg, I received a call from Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Williams, the DLA team chief who had conducted the audit. Her tone was both professional and slightly amazed. Major Thompson, I need to discuss our findings regarding Regional Command East Logistics Operations, she began. Are you familiar with something called the Adaptive Resource Management System? Yes, ma'am. I developed and implemented that system over the past 3 years. We need to talk. The audit results are significant. Are you available for a secure video conference this afternoon? The conference call included Williams and 3 other DLA officials who had participated in the audit. Their presentation was thorough and eye-opening, even for me as the architect of the system they were evaluating. Major Thompson, your logistics operation achieved cost savings of $47.3 million annually compared to standard practices, Williams reported. More importantly, your system demonstrated resilience capabilities that are unprecedented in our experience. During the audit period, your network maintained 97% operational effectiveness, despite 3 major security incidents that should have created significant supply disruptions. The audit had also identified the cultural intelligence aspects of my system as particularly valuable. Your relationships with local contractors and tribal leaders created redundant capabilities that traditional approaches can't replicate, another analyst noted. The cultural axis you developed provides strategic advantages beyond logistics efficiency. Most striking was their assessment of system sustainability. The concern we have, Williams continued, is that this system appears to be highly dependent on specific relationships and cultural knowledge that may not be easily transferable. Has your replacement been trained in these methodologies? I explained Davis's background and Morrison's preference for standardized approaches. The silence that followed was telling. Major Thompson, based on our findings, we strongly recommend that your system be preserved and expanded to other theaters. Would you be interested in discussing a position with the DLA that would allow you to institutionalize these innovations? 2 weeks later, I received a more dramatic call. Colonel Morrison himself, calling from Bagram with what sounded like barely controlled panic in his voice. Thompson, we need to discuss bringing you back for a consultation. He began without preamble. There have been some challenges with the logistics transition. Over the following 20 minutes, Morrison outlined a series of problems that had emerged since Davis took over operations. Local contractors were cancelling contracts due to misunderstandings about cultural protocols. Supply shortages had reappeared at forward bases because backup networks had been simplified out of existence. Most critically, transportation costs had increased by 340%. Because the informal arrangements I had negotiated with tribal leaders were no longer available. The DLA audit results came back, Morrison admitted. They're recommending that we restore your systems immediately. They also mentioned some concerns about operational sustainability without your specific expertise. I listened without expressing satisfaction, though I certainly felt vindicated. Sir, I'm currently transitioning to a new assignment with the Defense Logistics Agency. I'd be happy to provide consultation within my available schedule. What would it take to get you back here for a month to help restore these systems? Morrison asked, his tone markedly different from our last conversation. That would require approval from my new chain of command, I replied. The DLA position involves institutionalizing adaptive logistics methodologies for other theaters. Afghanistan would be valuable as a case study. The month-long consultation was approved, both because the DLA wanted to document successful system restoration and because Morrison's superiors were concerned about the operational degradation that had occurred so quickly after my departure. Returning to Afghanistan was surreal. The same buildings, the same landscape, but the logistics operation was clearly struggling. Davis greeted me with a mixture of relief and embarrassment, acknowledging that he had underestimated the complexity of what I had built. I thought I could improve efficiency by streamlining procedures, he admitted during our first meeting. I didn't realize how many informal relationships were holding the system together. The restoration process took 3 weeks of intensive work, rebuilding contractor relationships, re-establishing tribal connections, and training Davis's team in the adaptive approaches that made our system resilient. Morrison observed several briefings but maintained uncharacteristic silence, clearly recognizing that his previous assessment had been fundamentally flawed. The final DLA report, issued 6 months later, formally recommended that my adaptive resource management system be designated as the standard approach for logistics operations in culturally complex environments. The report specifically noted that traditional military logistics doctrine was insufficient for environments where success depended on cultural intelligence and relationship management. More satisfying was Morrison's final efficiency report, which was required to address the temporary degradation of logistics operations during my absence. His assessment acknowledged that my contributions had been unique and essential to mission success, and recommended that adaptive logistics capabilities be recognized as specialized skills requiring appropriate training and continuity planning. 2 years later, I am working with the DLA to implement similar systems in other challenging environments while developing training programs that help other logistics officers understand the cultural and relational aspects of supply chain management. The position leverages my field experience while contributing to broader institutional improvements. Looking back on Morrison's declaration that I was replaceable, I recognize that he wasn't entirely wrong. Individual personnel should never be indispensable to military operations. However, his error was assuming that effective systems are simple and that specialized expertise can be easily transferred without proper understanding or preparation. While I was serving, they called me replaceable. I just waited until the audit showed what I had built: not personal indispensability, but institutional capabilities that required specific knowledge, cultural understanding, and adaptive thinking to maintain. The audit didn't just vindicate my approach, it highlighted the difference between managing logistics as a routine administrative function versus developing logistics as a strategic capability. The most valuable outcome wasn't personal recognition, but the institutionalization of methods that help other logistics professionals succeed in complex environments. Military effectiveness ultimately depends not on any individual being irreplaceable, but on building systems that capture and transfer essential knowledge so that excellence can be sustained regardless of personnel changes. Morrison's mistake wasn't calling me replaceable, it was assuming that replacement could occur without understanding what was being replaced. The audit simply measured what I had always known, that effective logistics in complex environments require specialized knowledge, cultural intelligence, and adaptive systems that can't be reduced to standard procedures or PowerPoint presentations. Today, training the next generation of logistics officers, I emphasize both technical competence and cultural awareness, ensuring that future military operations will have leaders who understand the difference between managing supplies and building sustainable systems that keep soldiers equipped, fed, and alive in the world's most challenging environments.